Hello to you. Stand up nation. How's it going? Hope you guys rejuvenated. Um, I know I did. And now I want to talk to you about Burnham, who I have to admit, you know, I was very obsessed with him for a while. I still am a little, just lighter shade of obsession. Um, there's there's a lot to wrap your arms around here with Burnham because he seems to be working on more levels than most of the other comedians that we've watched. And by using different delivery methods, I guess, right? He does songs, he does little sketches, he does traditional stand up, um, and using the tech cues and things like that. He's a different animal, and there's a lot. Each of those things you can analyze equally, um, and it's just it's invigorating. Like watching, for me at least, like when I started watching him, I had been teaching this course for a while, and I'm like, oh shit, uh, this is the future of stand up. This is I was again invigorated by everything that is he made possible, I guess. Um, just as some background, if you don't know, he was signed by Comedy Central at 17 years old. Yeah. And he did an album. Basically, I think it was just basically his YouTube songs. And then his first special, Words, 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 was when he was 19. If that's not just a punch in the dick, I don't know what is for especially someone like me who's pushing 50 and loves comedy. Is like, oh, this guy. And you're like, come on. Really? Like this level of just, you know, of genius at 19. It's like, it's just everybody else should quit. Um, it's intimidating. I felt somewhat threatened by it. um, so his first special was at 19, and then he did What, and he did um, Make Happy. So those are the three specials that he has out. He started to delve off into other things. He actually directed Chris Rock's Tambourine, which we watched. He actually directed and I think wrote the movie Eighth Grade, which I'm assuming some of you have seen. Um, but I'll start with this. His specials, like, so he does Words, Words, Words at 19, and it's revolutionary. Like I've said multiple times, it completely dismantles the stand-up form and rebuilds it to this totally different thing with, again, all the sort of the mixed media, I guess you could say. So with somebody like that, it's like, okay, you did this thing, it was groundbreaking and phenomenal. What's next? Can you, in the jester, poet, philosopher move, right? Your next thing has to develop. It has to grow. Well, how do you grow from something that has sort of shattered the mold? So when What came out and I watched that, I'm like, he did it. Like he progressed. He didn't stay the same and do the same things with all the video, with all the audio cues and the disembodied voices and the the all those really meticulously timed bits and things like that. Like that, there was none of that in the first one. It's like and the same with Make Happy. I thought Make Happy kept pushing. So he's doing that, right? He's not resting on his success or his laurels and saying, I can just do a fucking bunch of shitty songs now. The songs are more in depth and introspective, and like just seeing that growth is inspiring. Like for someone like me in this teaching this class and things like that, like it's inspiring. Um, so one thing I'll say off the bat is that a bunch of you noticed like your comments were pretty thorough, and that some or all of you covered all the bases basically. Um, but one of the things that I think a lot of people, you know, either ignore or dismiss is what he's doing for musical comedy. Because in the past, traditionally, musical comedy is it's laughable. It's like one step above, maybe might not even be above ventriloquism and prop comics in the world of reputable, you know, entertainers and comedians or whatever. But he elevates it, right? He makes the songs about something, about religion, about um, race, about whatever it is. Um, he makes it about something. So in the past, musical comedy was always, you know, basically just putting the words dick and balls into a One Direction song or something and calling it One Erection. Like, yeah, hilarious. Or, you know what? And to your point, a couple of you made this point, like it was either that or Dice, right? Like to say that what Burnham is doing with musical comedy is the same as Dice is ridiculous, right? Stupid fucking nursery rhymes and changing the words around to make them sort of, yeah, to make them edgy or just sexual, I guess. Um, that that was musical comedy. So he completely sort of owns that with all of his songs. He says, this doesn't have to be laughable. These songs can be funny and meaningful, which is a metaphor for comedy in general, right? You don't just have to aim low. Um, you can enlighten and entertain at the same time, as you all know. So what he did for musical comedy is spectacular and groundbreaking in and of itself. Like take away everything else that he's done. Tearing down, rebuilding the form. All right. Now I will say this, and I can't remember who commented. It was Drew, I think. Drew was saying, if you haven't, you should watch the finale from Make Happy, which was the Kanye rant. Can't handle this right now, it's called. So I'll say this to everybody who wasn't in class on last Tuesday. We did watch that. This is one of the few times that the in-person people saw something different than the online people with Bo Burnham. I chose a selection of his songs, basically, um, to watch from all three specials, just to give some depth and breadth to his material. And we watched an interview. It's called The Green Room, and it was just a roundtable discussion with other comedians about Bo Burnham when he was like 20. So these older comedians like Ray Romano and Judd Apatow and um, Gary Shandling and Mark Maron are talking to him and just asking him questions. And there's some interesting insights in that. If you want to go watch that, just search Bo Burnham Green Room, I think. Um, there's a comment in there from Gary Shandling to uh, Bo Burnham where he said, "I watched your show, and I never felt like there was never a fake moment. The entire hour, there was never a fake moment. You were there being you. Like they talked about how that is like the ultimate goal. It's this almost zen like, you know, state that not many comedians get to. Um, so his approach to all of this, the self awareness, I think, is a very Gen Z. Um, I've talked for, I think Gen X was the first generation to really start to look inward. We kind of talked about this with Ginny Garofalo, where it was like self awareness became a thing and a priority. And I think it's only been getting, I want to say we mastered it, and now Gen Z is sort of overcorrecting, and you're too hyper self aware, maybe. And Bo Burnham is kind of, I think he uses it for the powers of good in this case. Um, you know, he's aware of his position in this sort of relationship with art and audience and fame and money and like as I think Drew was saying, like how that's just it's eating him up inside because he wants to be everything for everybody, and trying to be everything for everybody is can eat away at oneself, right? In the Kanye rant, he talks about that. Um, his conflicted relationship with the audience, his conflicted relationship. He does this. Art is Dead. The song "Art is Dead" from Words, Words, Words is about that. It's about like, you know, for so many, he's trying not to fall into the trap, but for so many, it's about the money, and it's about, you know, the budget in the show. Like he wants to do art, not um, comedy. Maybe that, I don't know if that's the right way to say that, but if nothing else, he's aware of his role in these relationships, and he's trying to come to terms with them, I think. And I don't think many other artists are doing it with such uh, with such insight, if they're doing it at all, if they care at all. Um, comedy can be more than we make it. It seems to embody that for me, right? Like a lot of you commented, like, "Oh, it's different. It looks different, and it's so much more interesting than a guy or girl standing behind a microphone and talking like that." I think that's a byproduct of, you know, of his performances are like there's so much more here, right, to mine for meaning if we just let it, right? Comedy can be more than we make it out to be, which is what I've been saying since day one. Like there's more to this than just ha ha ha. Um, yeah, his straight white male. That song about basically white male privilege is what it's about. Um, it seems to be. a direct answer to, Dice's whole thing, right? Um, the idea that somehow white men can be persecuted or something um, is pretty laughable. I'm not saying that it's impossible, but it's pretty laughable in this country at least. But Dice certainly was giving off that vibe, just like, they're coming for me, and here's Burnham sort of cutting that heading that off at the pass, I guess. Um, yeah, I mentioned this. He talks a lot. It is very introspective. A lot of you brought that up in your comments. The introspection, like he's in the conflict that goes into this introspection. When you start, like, a lot of people don't want to look inward because they're afraid of what they're going to find. And he's literally, every show is him doing that um, on stage for hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people. And he's almost as obsessively self-aware in all of these performances where he's looking. And I use this comparison, like, because he's very self-deprecating, but it goes further than that. Where did I write that down? Yeah, there's Louis C.K. is a perfect example. Like, his comedy is very self-deprecating. Like, he knows he's an asshole, and he's sort of like, here's how I'm an asshole, right? Bo Burnham is more self-evaluative. He's trying to figure out if he's an asshole. And I think those two very sort of definitive of each, right? Louis C.K. is in his 50s, Bo's in his 20s. So they're generations apart. And just I think it shows a progression, right? Bo's saying we need to look inside ourselves for these answers. Almost an obsessive self-awareness. We're trying to figure out if I'm an asshole, because that's the question that he keeps asking. Is like, am I an asshole for taking your money and putting on this show? And I think at the end of the day, he can say, no, I'm not the asshole because I'm actually giving them a show. I'm not just going out and, doing the hits and going home and cashing my check. Like, he puts years into these things. He puts time and he puts time and money and care into these shows. I think to, you know, mitigate any of that negative self-analysis that, like, am I giving them enough? So that whole idea of Louis and his ilk, right? Basically self-deprecating, and Bo Burnham, and increasingly more comedians now being more self-evaluative, evaluating themselves to figure out if he's an asshole, if that makes any sense. I think it does. What else here? Yeah, deprecation versus evaluation. A bunch of you made this comment, not maybe so succinctly, but I'll sort of summarize it. Like, it's important and meaningful that he got his start as a YouTuber, and look what he's done with that. He's turned what started as a really, like, traditional musical comedy, very silly, kind of easy songs about Of course, he was like fucking 15 or 16 or 17 or something. So he's doing YouTube comedy, right? Cute little silly um, songs that, yeah, that was just sort of, okay, yeah, I get it, irrelevant. His fame, like he turned that into something more, right? And a few of you made the comment, he started as a YouTuber, but has transcended that. He didn't just stay a YouTuber. You know what I'm saying? I also find it funny that a lot of, there were a few people who made the comments about how, oh, I think the songs can get old, you know, and that was sort of a complaint, like, oh, well, the songs can get old after a while. I'm like, but you guys grew up on YouTube where everything is old. Like every YouTuber does the same thing every video. I, um. Anyway, he didn't. Like, again, it would have been easy for him to make up cute little songs with funny little rhymes about Facebook, right? Write a song about Facebook. He could have done that, but he no, like his integrity, that self evaluation, that um, sort of his relationship with the audience. Like I owe them something more than that. So he keeps building, he keeps growing, keeps pursuing that, poet, philosopher sort of progression, and he gets there. I think it's noble of him that he used this sort of format that's for the masses and of the masses, and he sort of ascended beyond it. He didn't he wasn't just happy with like being the silly YouTube guy. And there many of you made this comment too, like there aren't many who make it out, right? Yeah, to mainstream or offline success in comedy, especially. Um, I think that's as huge a part of who he is and what he means to comedy as anything. The fact that he shed you know, that reputation as soon as he could. Right? Comedy Central signed him. He was like, okay, now I don't have to do that shit anymore. Um, I can do actual art. Like, I think that's something that you guys are making that connection to in your comments. Like, this is, you can call it, I mean, labels are dumb, period, sort of inherently, but this is art. This is performance art. It just happens to be funny. Like, I think that's um, something to think about. The way he talks about mental health, like a lot of his shows feel very much like therapy sessions between audience and performer. The right brain, left brain stuff, the we think we know you, the Kanye rant, all those kinds of things are him. That self evaluation, right? He's looking at himself and all this stuff. For someone like me teaching a class on stand up, not only teaching a class on stand up, but how stand up can be meaningful. The right brain, left brain song or bit is, I mean, it's the foundation of this course, right? He's literally explaining, you know, the analytic side and the creative side can come together, and what brings those two things together. Comedy brings them together. So his understanding of that, of how comedy works on more levels than just the sort of the emotional, impulsive entertainment level, but the meaning level as well, right? And the conflict between them, like we need to bring those two things together to experience the world and humor in this case. Um, it's the perfect bit for for me, like for my purposes. videos as the instructor of this course. um, Basically saying that comedy is the thing that incorporates the light and the dark and the heavy, the left and the right, the joke and the meaning. I think that's just that bit for me is the one, right? If someone were to describe your course to me, I'd play him that bit. Be like, that's what I'm talking about. So your comments were yummy. uh, Courtney, I just like that you said Bo Burnham is an integral part of growing up for your generation. I don't disagree. It was an integral part of my growing up, and you know, I saw him first when I was like 40 years old. Um, I just like the way that hit me, right? And keeping it relevant, a lot of you made that connection to like his constant movement from piano to mic to, you know, sort of pre-recorded bits and things like that is for the attentionally challenged of you, right? Your generation, quick hit bits and just, yeah, short attention spans. But he's also dealing with issues that your generation is dealing with more so than those prior, right? Mental illness, mental health, white male privilege, like all these kinds of things going into those through this method, I think, again, is, I guess it only makes sense to do that. Elizabeth brought up the therapy issue. Like it feels like he's going through this with you. The audience is the therapist in this case, and he's the subject, and he's kind of just, we're witnessing this therapy session. And that goes back to self-evaluation and introspection and all those things and how inherent those are to his performances. And Elizabeth also talked about, the YouTube, like coming from YouTube. So I touched on that a couple minutes ago about how he should be applauded for that alone, for being like, seeing YouTube as a jumping off point or as a foot in the door kind of thing. And then once he got it, right, you can tell how much he cares about the art because he keeps making it art, not just, bullshit. Logan said he's singing about analyzing the struggle. Not just singing about the struggle, but singing about, his songs are analysis of the struggle, his role in the struggle, how he feels about the struggle, of all these kinds of things, of whatever it might be, his position within them. And Logan and others use the term vulnerable, like he feels vulnerable. It's funny that a lot of you said he was humble, and sort of like humble, I guess, which, me, I talk about humility in comedy, how it's inherent to comedy, but at the same time, like, people view him as pretentious and sort of like full of himself. So that's always interesting to me, that sort of paradox, because I agree. I think he's humble enough to sort of let you in to this magnitude. Okay? That type of openness is pretentious. Um, I guess people can. Kent, I appreciated your YouTube resume. It is very impressive. Uh, it seems like you're almost done with the internet, uh, but they're making stuff every day for you. But again, you were kind of talking about the same thing with the YouTube. Like he kind of he created this path out, I guess. And the path out is like I think caring about the art more than the money. We haven't really talked about it a ton, but we keep bumping up against this idea. Um, if you're in it for the money, that's great, but I don't really want to waste my time, um, personally. But if you're in it for the art, I'll give you all my money. Does that make sense? Um, Seems like Burnham understood that from an early age. Um, Michael talked about uh, his criticism and analysis all pointed inward, not outward at other groups, right? The way the dice thing was, among others, many other comedians are like, anyone different than me, how can I keep them at bay, at arm's length? He almost doesn't concern himself. Someone else, I think it might have been Sonia, maybe, was talking about how um, it's comedy for everybody. His comedy is for everybody. Um, so I like that idea of criticism and analysis is pointed inward instead of outward at everybody else. Adelia, I wrote in response to your comment, he's the open closed comedian. Right, so he talks about having trouble off stage relating to people, right? Doesn't have a ton of friends, is just sort of like closed off, but yet he is, I mean, we have an extremely open look at who he is when he's on stage. So that sort of conflict of he's open extremely, but then closed at the same time. I thought that was interesting. Um, but Adelia had a point about the "We Think We Know You" finale that I never really thought about. It was a really good interpretation. At the end of that song, the whole song, he figures out that he can control, right, how he reacts to all this criticism and all these haters or naysayers or people who don't really understand or only look at it from the surface, right? He figures out slowly, like and then by the end, he is manipulating them. That's a really interesting way to look at it, and I like it, and I will steal it, right? Um, Only he controls how he can let criticism affect him. Um, that was on point. I like that a lot. Um, Freddie, and this is all stuff I kind of brought up, you know, earlier, right? He understands his position, his relationship to fame, self, audience, like art, the whole thing. Maybe he doesn't understand it. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but he's working to understand it, right? And come to grips with what it all means. Um, and that's refreshing, I think, right? He doesn't pretend to have all the answers. No one does. Or no one has all the answers, but a lot of people pretend they do, right? The search for those answers is what's compelling. Drew, I wanted to just mention, we did watch that in class and you missed it, but good on you for seeking it out yourself. Um, Jackie, I, I, I didn't think of it until you said it, but Book of Mormon vibes, 100%. Like, it was really, I appreciated that little nugget of information. Because now that I think about it, like, it does have some of that vibe. Um, so I appreciated that connection. And then Holly brought up self evaluation, which brings us full circle because I was just running my mouth about that a while ago. Um, that difference between self deprecation and self evaluation, it's a fine line, but Bo Burnham walks it deftly. All right, this one's 36 minutes, so. Oh, I must reward those people who have sat here for 36 minutes. Secret bonus, extra credit word for you to use in your comment on this post is underscore. Underscore. Use the word underscore in your comment on this video, on this post, and you will receive extra credit towards your final grade. Yay.